Thanks so much for joining me on the Music Ed Podcast. This podcast is going to be just a fun one. I had a chance to meet a fellow podcaster and band director, Kyle Smith, and we just talked about some things about our programs and some things that have worked for us. I'm going to post a link in the show notes for you to subscribe to the Growing Band Director podcast, which Kyle leads. It has a totally different format than mine. I subscribe to his podcast and listen to it frequently. I hope you enjoy this discussion between me and Kyle.
I'm here with James Devine, who's a motivational speaker, author, and musician out of Colorado, the host of something that is very brilliant, in addition to the Music Ed podcast, the 2-Minute Teacher podcast. That's amazing. Thanks for hanging with me today. Can you tell me a little bit about the 2-Minute Teacher podcast?
I will, Kyle. Thanks for having me on the show. This is actually going to be a joint show with the Music Ed podcast. I think it's going to be too long for the 2-Minute Teacher podcast. But I'm in my 26th year of teaching. I'm semi-retired. I did 25 years of full-time teaching, and I'm half-time at a charter school this year. But I had always wanted to be, when I thought about what am I going to do when I'm done with teaching music, and I thought I wanted to be a teacher coach. Well, it's hard to just coach music teachers. And so the 2-Minute Teacher podcast kind of comes out of that. And I tell people it's 2 minutes or less or your money back for the free podcast. But it's just quick tips that are 2 minutes or less, and any teacher can implement in any subject matter.
Can you give us some examples of some of the things that have been from there?
Oh, you're going to put me on this spot, aren't you?
Oh, I listened to a couple. One was about.
So one of the episodes is you've got to spread seeds, and it talks about how everything that we're doing is spreading seeds to the students, and we're not always going to see what's growing or what's happening with that, but it's all growing, and sometimes that growth takes place just like a farmer harvests what they're doing. It'll take months and maybe even years before we see that. Another recent episode was get your admin involved. So I share about how I had a crazy parent, one that accused me of trying to kill their child. And I was in a younger time of my teaching, and I waited too long to get my admin involved. And now I would do that right away. I would say, oh, thanks. Good talking to you. I'm going to talk to Mrs. Smith, and we'll get back in touch with you and talk more. So I kind of shared about that. Another one is it ever okay to yell? And I talk about how a lot of teachers, the students quickly learn that there's a certain level the teacher will tolerate. And if they stay below that level, then the teacher is fine. And then the teacher yells, and they know I pushed the limits or the boundaries with that. And we should never get to that point with the kids.
Well, I'm trying to think of the last time I yelled. Can you yell in a musical setting? Can you yell to, not to scold them, but say you're trying to get them to exaggerate dynamics or come out of their comfort zone or something like that?
I do that all the time. So I think you can yell in those kinds of, but to yell to, unfortunately, I came from a school where the good thing is we had 4 buildings. This was the last school I was at before the charter school I'm at now. And the choir teacher, the drama teacher, the art teacher and I were in one building to ourselves, and we were all very relational with the kids. Hey, how you doing? Hey, are you having a hard day? How's your day going? And we would be shocked. We'd go into the other building, and teachers were screaming like, "Get your effing hat off!" And it was shocking to me because I'm thinking, wouldn't you get fired for saying that? And what a way to greet a student in the morning. I mean, yeah, you want them to get their hat off, but you just don't need to approach it that way. Wow. And so that was, it's like, okay, no wonder sometimes these kids came to our building and were seeming like they had been traumatized.
So can you tell me a little bit about the mission of the Music Ed podcast?
The Music Ed podcast is quick and easy tips for how to be a better band teacher. I think it's geared probably more to teachers in their first 3 to 5 years who need a little bit of coaching, and hopefully they learn from me the easy way, things that I had to learn the hard way. And how about your podcast, the Growing Band Director podcast? Did I get that right?
That's what it is. Yeah, it comes from the famous Ray Kroc quote, who was the owner and founder of McDonald's. He had a quote that said, "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot." So obviously, there's a lot of people around the world who have the growth mentality, the growth mindset. So thinking as a band director specifically, that we always want to be getting better, and just the ability to have conversations about pedagogy, about literature, about teaching, the art of teaching, about relationships, about everything that we do as band directors. It's just been a really great opportunity to share a lot of information. So I try to hit as much as I can from beginning band up through high school and into collegiate. It is a band podcast. There's not a lot of music ed outside of the band stuff. But we try to do as much as possible. My wife's a middle school teacher, so I get a lot of her feedback as well. It's really easy to do a high school band podcast, but I work really hard to do a lot of middle school stuff and beginning band stuff as well.
Awesome. And does she teach band as well?
She does. We're really lucky. So since 2006, we have been teaching in Westbrook, and she teaches 5 through 8, and I teach 9 through 12. So, awesome. So we're the only teachers that the kids have.
So you never complain about your feeder?
Never. In fact, yeah, never. I'm lucky because I tell the kids, if we don't do this right, I'm not going to eat at home, right? I mean, she's actually my feeder. So yeah,
that's awesome.
I'm super lucky.
You know, I've heard you talk about that quote before on your podcast, and I'm ashamed to admit when I was like, okay, I know who Ray Kroc is. It's like, what college did he teach at? Where I thought it was from a college band director.
Yeah, McDonald's. Yeah, and it's funny. He always said that I'm not really into this that much, but he was always into. He said he is in the real estate business. It was like, I'm not in the restaurant business. It's about real estate. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so like where they put all the McDonald's was the hugest. It's like where it is as important as the company itself.
I've heard some people say that if you know that a McDonald's goes in, some of the other franchises, they actually look for that and then they go in the same spot.
Sure.
Or across the street from them.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I just love the mission that we both have. You know, we're not that you or I know everything, because clearly that's not possible, but sharing a lot of our, accumulated knowledge, and the guests, having other people on who, I've just been amazed that I'll meet with somebody who's like a very experienced teacher and their programs are top notch, and they say all the same stuff that we all say, relationships with kids, programming quality literature, learning about that, striving for mastery. It's like, it's not a secret anywhere. It's all the same struggles.
I think it really is. And one of the recent episodes that I had, or actually, it starts, I don't know if you experienced this, but then I start thinking, did I write an article about that? Or did I do a podcast on that? Or was I talking to a friend? And so sometimes I'm not quite sure.
Yep.
But I talked about how it's just as easy, or it takes just as much work to like take one of those top-notch bands and just take it up the next level, like where they get 1s to 1+ or something, mm-hmm. as it would to take a program that's been neglected for many years and get them to where they're sounding okay, but they go and get a 3 their first year. And but it's just as much work, and sometimes it's different struggles.
Yeah, and it's funny how your ears get accustomed to what you hear. Right? If you hear a band that's maybe in the middle and they make some improvements, it's easy to like be okay with the right notes and rhythms and forget about all the other stuff that you can get to.
Yeah.
And then if you're teaching one of these stellar bands and all you're dealing with is like those minute details, you're right. Sometimes those are the hardest things to achieve, but you also forget how good your group sounds sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the key with having guest clinicians come in, because their ears are going to be attuned to something different, and they're going to be able to catch something that maybe you don't catch, or they're focusing on something different. So you've heard of Ray Kramer, haven't you?
I have.
We are fortunate that he chose to retire in Colorado Springs. And so he's cutting out some on the clinics, I think, now, but when he first retired, it was pretty inexpensive to bring him in. He's retired from Indiana University. And when I was a much younger band director, he came in, and all he did one time was he had almost all the low brass players pull out quite a bit. and all of a sudden my band sounded way better. And it's like, how could I not have heard that? But now I hear it. Now I can go and know what to hear and know what to try. But that one time of him coming in and working on the low brass tuning, not even everybody's tuning, really took it up a notch.
You know, the amount of people I think who are hesitant to even bring somebody in is really remarkable. You know, I know the feeling where it's all about us, right? We're self-confident. We're not self-confident. If we have somebody come in and our band needs to be worked with, we feel like we're not the best teacher, right? But like experienced clinicians know that nobody knows everything. So right. if you invite them in and you have people in front of your band, the message it sends to your band is enormous, that it's not about you, it's about getting better. And two, the people clinicking you, you get more credit from them because you're willing to put people in front of your band. I mean, the amount of band directors who don't have anybody in front of their band, it's really easy. It's usually free too. Just find somebody who's experienced and have them come in.
If you ask enough people, you'll find someone who can do it for free.
Yeah. I mean, you might not get Fred Fennell, but a lot of people will do it for free.
So that reminds me of a question for you. I'm guessing that you do not belong to ASBDA,
I don't.
American School.
Nope.
I think that you need to be part of that group. So I'm going to be working on recommending you.
Well, fabulous.
Group.
Tell me why.
Because you're one of the people we want in the organization. So it's usually people mid-career who are seeing success in their programs. They're doing the things we talked about: relationship, high standards, getting the kids to sound good, working on the fundamentals, those kind of things. And but you remind me of it when talking about having a mentor come in. People can go to the asbdaband.org, and I believe they can request a mentor for free.
That's great. And they'll mentor you through anything for your career.
Yeah. So usually they try to find someone who's a member who's close by and retired or semi-retired, and then pay for them to come in and spend a day or half a day with the directors. I'm not sure how many Maine people we have. There's some states that are underrepresented, and Maine might be one of them.
Yeah, well, there's like 7 people in a moose who live here, so not really. We're like 1.3 million.
Your wife?
Well, yeah, 1.3 million. So that in our head that sounds like a lot, but for an entire state, that's nothing. So
yeah, that's not much for a whole state. Oh, but you have Wyoming beat, I think.
I believe so. So you had mentioned that one thing we could talk about today would be 5 things that you wish you knew as a younger teacher.
Yeah. So what are some things that you wish you knew?
I tell you, like, I wish I knew that I didn't know everything. You know, I wish I didn't start that first job, because those people who taught with me or were with me in my first few years of teaching, if they're listening, I apologize to you greatly. There's a lot of things that I thought I knew that I didn't. I thought I could just come in and change a culture, which I think I did in my first school, but I didn't always do it in the we sort of way. You know, I had finished a master's degree in conducting, and I knew the things and they didn't know the things, and it was a pretty like one-sided sort of affair. And I think my students really liked me, but I think I burned a lot of bridges too. And the more that I've taught, I've realized that it's really just like most other jobs, in that you're working with people, and if you get everybody kind of on the same team as best as possible, then life's going to be easier for you.
Amen. Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah.
I was the opposite, because I did not have an undergrad degree I had no undergrad degree at first, but definitely not in music. So I went right into the Army band and learned my way through as a performer through that from on the job. And then I took my first teaching job, and my bachelor's from your part of the country was actually from business administration. And so I started my first teaching job, and I was like, I don't know any of this stuff. And I had always wanted to go back and get my master's. And with raising 4 kids, it was hard, and I kept putting it off. And finally, in 2010, I started a 3 summer program that I finished in 2012 at the age of 43, I think, or 45. I was 45 years old when I finished that, and got my master's in music education. And so now I really realize how little I know. And I'm sure you're the same way. The more I learn, the more I realize how little I still know.
It's totally true. Yeah. I wish I knew more rep. I mean, I'm learning more and more rep, but then I realized the more rep I learn, there's so much music I don't know. I also felt like when I mean, if there's anybody who's about to enter a job, I'll say this: what you're doing in your college wind ensemble probably has no place in what you're going to do as a teacher. Like I remember Lincolnshire Posey being a one-off, like that. I mean, obviously not seriously. That's a lot of work, but we weren't chasing all the notes and the rhythms. And I thought, oh, I'll get a group to play Lincolnshire Posey. And it's like, unless you're in a special situation, that's so I just wish I had known more grade 2, more grade 3, especially. We've done a lot of 4s and a lot of 5s in my career, but I think the grade 2 and 3 stuff is so good. And when you have kids who are not overwhelmed by difficulty, you can make some spectacular music.
That was a mistake I made early on, was the rep, usually picking songs that were too difficult. Now, I learned from a friend of mine named Wayne Hoy, and I subbed for him one time, or helped him out with his jazz band, and his folder was like that thick for the kids. And I was like, "Are you guys playing all these songs?" And he's like, "No, we just keep a bunch of stuff in there, and we'll read stuff, and then we decide what we're going to do." And this was probably 8 or 10 years ago that I saw him in action with this. And at that time, I changed what I did, and I do that now. Maybe not quite as thick as his folders were, but I just stuff the folders now. And there's some stuff in there I know we'll never be able to do this year, but I want the kids to experience some of the failures and some of the successes with working on it. But we might never perform it, but we might. It could be one year where everything aligns and everybody practices 2 hours a night. It could be one of those years where it works out. But I throw a lot of stuff in there, and there's some really good grade 1.5 rep out there too.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
It's nice to have the kids. When I was at the high school level, sometimes we'd do a song like that, and it was nice for the kids to see in 30 minutes we could have a performance ready.
Yeah, and I mean, say you have a grade 4 band, whatever, a grade 4 band. Try working on a grade 2 ballad. Oh, because I forget who said this to me, but like every ballad is a grade 4. Like no matter what, you're talking about tone and all the things. There's no easy ballad. Like try doing a grade 1.5 ballad with a great band. Oh, it's so fun because you can just do musicality. So I have a group. I'll say it right now. My wind ensemble. We're doing 5 pieces for this concert that's coming up in a couple of weeks. And again, it's one of those, we're doing more pieces as at an easier level. And there's a couple that are harder. But we're not doing the original First Suite. We're doing the Michael Sweeney themes from First Suite, which if people don't know, you might go, well, I don't know. That seems like a middle school piece. Well, it might be. A lot of middle school bands could play it. But it's the first and the third movement, and it's the essence of those pieces at a grade 2 level. And my kids sound fantastic. And I'm proud to say that I don't have to do the original, because if we were doing the original, we'd be chasing a lot of stuff right now. And there's a place in the year for us to be doing that. But, September is not the time.
Right. I think I've done that version when I was at a high school, and I loved it. Because if we could have spent months and months working on the original, and maybe they would have gotten it pretty decent. But I didn't want to put that much time into it, but I still wanted to expose them to that.
I think we think that because we can conduct a piece, and we can teach a piece, quote unquote, that the kids will be able to play the piece. And it's like, can you think about having pieces that you actually get to master and play really artistically? Not just, can we learn all the notes and the rhythms by the time the concert comes out? I mean, that's one thing that my wife does brilliantly. I mean, she programs easier than most other middle school teachers I know, but her bands sound fantastic. And then she'll have a push piece here or there where they really have to kind of like gear up for that. But they always sound fantastic, and they're making great music.
Awesome. Awesome. If you have not done this piece or heard of it, you need to look into it.
Lay it on me.
Every time I'm a guest conductor somewhere for an honor group, I'll choose this piece if they let me choose it. It's a grade 2 piece called Circus Scenes.
I have not heard of this.
Listen to it. You'll either love it or hate it. One of the two. The kids have always loved it, and I never get tired of conducting it.
Who's the writer?
I don't remember who it is. I think it's published by Grand Mesa Music, which is out here in Colorado.
Okay. You know, one other thing I wish I knew when I was younger as a teacher, that if I could make my classroom like a great general music classroom, then my kids would have a blast. And what I mean by that is I remember going to like some general music things, and most people will say, well, why are you going to general music? I honestly don't remember why I was at a general music clinic. It was one of these, we were all doing it, and they were talking about the amount of times the teacher would make music or they would sing songs, but they would be patting the beat along. They'd be moving to the music. It's like they're all participating all the time. So I found ways throughout my rehearsals for literally kids, except for maybe 5 minutes out of an hour, every kid will be active the whole time. I mean, we know what it's like to sit and work with the flute section for 12 minutes, right? Well, you should take 12 minutes. It probably takes 30 minutes, but you're going to do it in 3 minutes, right? It's kind of one of those situations, but the ability to involve everybody as much as possible. So like one thing I love to do is, a lot of times general music teachers will start singing a song and they'll say, everybody pat the beat with me. And they'll just have them pat. And sometimes they'll pat the beat or they'll make up a rhythm that works with the beat, but the kids are keeping the beat. And I find if I'm working with the trumpet section, to have the rest of the band pat the beat with them, it doesn't work in every piece, but almost always, that requires the rest of the band is A, listening, and B, they're paying attention musically, which means they can't speed up or slow down. And also that beatkeeping helps the weaker section, which is working on something that they can't play right now. And I just find that's one thing I can really do. I also like having kids sing or play along. If a section is playing it, everybody, I want you to sing this. I want you to play it. It's like, I know you don't know it yet, but just sing it as you hear it. Just finding ways to work on it, but keeping them all involved.
That's great. I probably don't get my kids to sing enough. But something kind of along the lines of what you did. I wish I could do this more often, but it takes a lot of prep work. When I have a song that maybe is a little bit of a stretch for the band, and maybe it has let's say there's a baritone section that is very lyrical, but it's difficult for the baritones to get it. I'll actually create a worksheet and transpose all the parts and have everybody play that lyrical section. Mm-hmm. And maybe we start with just the rhythm and then the transposed parts. And then we talk about the phrasing of it. And then it allows me, the times I've done that, I've only done that probably about 5% of the songs we've done. But what it allows me then to do is, if for some reason that section isn't quite cutting it, I can say, we're going to add the saxes in with them, or we're going to add the clarinets, or we're going to add the section leaders, and it'll change the timbre some of the song. But I found a lot of success with that, and we just use that as part of our warm-up sheet, mm-hmm. Our warm-up section.
What I've heard those called one sheets. I've heard them called companion guides.
I never gave a name to it. I think I just called it workout, I think is what I call it. So if it's like Circus Scenes, the songs we were talking about, I just title it Circus Scenes Workout. And so then we pull that out and right before we do the song.
Yeah, if anybody listening, either to your side of the podcast or my side of the podcast, has any of these that they'd like to share, and I'll open this up to you as well. If you could email it to either James or myself through our websites and things. I have a folder already that people have started contributing their companion guides. And it would just be great for people to be able to access, because like I'm doing one of St. Petersburg March and somebody's like, oh, will you send that? We're working on it too, And you're right, everybody to be able to work on the stuff. It's just great.
Oh, that's awesome. That's all. Thank you for putting that together and doing that. I'll have to find mine. I haven't, I don't have a use for them this year. So they're
Yep.
buried somewhere in my computer folders.
Somewhere. One thing else I wish I had knew earlier is you don't have to work on the whole piece every day. Like I always feel like, okay, say I'm talking about our marching band production. I might say, okay, by this date, we need to complete it, but we can't work on, say, all 4 pieces today in a 2-hour rehearsal. Let's focus on part 1 or part 4 or whatever it is. Like, and then I started doing that more in my wind ensemble rehearsals. It's like, okay, this piece is 200 measures long. I want to focus on all of it because we need it. How about this week we focus on the first A section and the introduction, and next week we'll focus on the second A section, and then in the third week, you know what I mean? And if you structure it that way, the students don't get overwhelmed, and then it just builds and builds and builds.
Now that I love that, and I've incorporated something similar. Do you spend then the whole class time on that section?
Well, I was thinking. I mean, usually depending on the length of the period, I'll do 2 to 4 different pieces within that. But yeah, like I might say, for this 20 minutes, we're only going to hit this portion of the piece. And then sometimes, a lot of times, we need to play all of it. I'm just thinking for pieces where you feel like you have to work on everything.
Yeah, and so I don't know if it's a more of a middle school thing. I find that in a 50-minute section, if I have a 50-minute class, we'll usually work on 4 different pieces, but not the entire thing. It might be letter A of the first piece and the ending of the second piece, rather than letter A of the first piece, the ending of the first piece, and letter C. For some reason, that switching the music and it might just be a middle school thing, and that they feel like, okay, we accomplished something, we can see what we did, and we're now going to the next piece.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. One thing I also really like to do. I lost my train of thought. Man, I'm old. It's gone. It's gone.
It's a Friday afternoon.
It's gone.
So what have you, do you also have a marching band?
I do. Yep.
And you said your season is ending soon. We're recording this on October 13th for those listening.
Our season in Maine ends the Saturday before Halloween, because it starts getting pretty cold. So we have 6 shows. They start in the middle of September and they go through October. Some years we do the New England circuit as well, and that goes 1 week later.
Okay, so that's very similar to Colorado, because here at the last weekend of this month is when we have the state finals and that sort of thing. But one of these days, the school I'm at now, we have a fall break. So I just started my fall break and we'll have a week off, and I don't have marching band. And so one of these years, maybe I'll finally get to bring my wife to see Fall Colors. We were chatting before we started recording about the Fall Colors and how beautiful they are in Maine and also in Colorado.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people, I think marching band gets a bad rap. I think, first of all, I think there's people who do marching band who just try to play too loud. They try to play differently than they do inside. My approach, my colleague Jeff and people I teach with and a lot of people I've learned from, teaching marching band is just like teaching wind ensemble. You're just outside running around at 1,000 beats a minute and doing all the choreography. But like you still have a woodwind section. I remember going to, who's a famous teacher from Lassiter High School in Georgia? It's terrible that I can't think of his name. I saw him Alfred Watkins. I heard him at Midwest, and he says, people, you have a woodwind section. Use it. Right? And so many marching bands try to be like drum corps and just they feature the brass. I think if people like just marching band can be just as musical as your wind ensemble. You just have to treat it that way.
Now, I have a interesting story from one time I took my bands to a festival, and there was an indoor portion, and then the next day there was a parade. And there was a band that we heard that was on the stage, and they were from out of state. We felt sorry for them. They were a high school group, but they sounded bad.
Yeah.
We were outside the next day warming up for the parade, and we were near where they were at warming up for the parade, and they sounded amazing. the students were floored. I was floored. I was like, what is going on that they sounded so bad on stage? So I don't know if you have some insight into that, because that it still bugs me. I lose sleep over it every week. Not really.
So they sounded bad inside, but outside
Yes.
they sounded good?
Yeah. They sounded amazing outside.
Well, there's a good chance that they're talking about all the outdoor things, like, you're talking about projection, and obviously in marching band, we tend to play a little bit louder. And I don't really know. I mean, some schools sometimes they don't take the indoor stuff as seriously because it's, quote, not as fun. Like sometimes the marching band stuff people view as more fun, but then they don't necessarily push the wind ensemble in the same way that they push the marching band. I think that does happen if the emphasis of the program is more on one side. I'm a firm believer that it should be on your concert programs, that and your chamber music. If those things are happening, and I got to tell you, my program is weak in chamber music. We do it, but not as much as we'd like to do it. Then the marching band side of things and the jazz band side of things usually are good. But when people start putting, the cart before the horse, if you will, like marching band is the center of everything, a lot of times tone and technique and musicality can go out the window.
So you think it was that that was where their focus was, and so most of their practice was happening with the outdoor sound?
I'm guessing. There might be an opportunity where they just don't take it as seriously.
They looked pretty serious though, because they were very professional, I think. But I think they wore their like marching band uniforms on the stage, and when they're coming out, it's like, oh, this is going to be amazing. And then it was sad. It was bad. It sounded very blatty, like it. And sometimes the charter school I'm at, I'm getting to start a band program from scratch. So I have just beginner students, but they range 6th, 7th, 8th grade. So now we've just started talking about we've been talking about it a lot, but now we're more of our focus is on getting that balanced sound. First, it was getting enough air. And so like I have a couple of trumpet players. And so I'll demonstrate for them sometimes, and I'll say, okay, I can fill up the room with this sound, and I'll play the trumpet. And they all agree it's like too much. If it was outside, it might be different. But getting that, so I call that sound like a blatty sound. It just is like rattles a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they sounded like on the stage.
Yeah. I mean, that can easily happen for sure. I think, and there's also nothing better. I think of my friend Trey Blanco, who's director of bands at Butler University. He says something. He says, I love me a soft band. A band that can play soft. So sometimes we just play too loud. I mean, all of our bands, we just have to work on the soft end of things.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm very curious. There's not a ton of people. There are some. There's not a ton of people who have where husband and wife are both in this field, and especially where one is the feeder. What are some things you guys do maybe to keep balance in your life so that you're not spending your Friday night date night, well, Friday nights are probably spent at the football game, but you're not spending your time with your wife talking to shop?
Yeah, the story that sort of my wife and I's story, not to make it about us, but you did ask. So we started dating when we were teaching in our first jobs in different districts. We started dating in April, or was it May? It was May. And then literally within 3 weeks, both jobs, high school and middle school, opened up in Westbrook. We were both looking for different positions. I was looking for a place like where we ended up, and she was looking for a place where there was a K-12 program. She was at a place before where she kind of felt like the program stopped in 8th grade, and she really wanted to be somewhere where there was something for the kids to go on to in high school. So we were professionally a good match as well as maritally. So we started dating, and then both jobs opened up, and we both decided to go for them. Of course, we didn't tell them we were dating at the time. We just separately, right? So like, well, we'll see if it's God's will or not. So we both applied for the jobs, and we both ended up getting the jobs. I think her job was more in demand than mine was. I think she had more competition than I did. But either way, we both got them. And I'll say I have a tip. One reason I think I got the job, I looked up the band the year before, and I sort of saw, okay, they have 2 bands, and this is what they play. I came up with the repertoire we would play my first year there. I said
Oh,
the
wow.
wind ensemble is going to play. This is the first concert. This is the second concert. This is the third concert. This is the fourth concert. And I didn't change the concerts. I did what they have always done, and I put it on really nice cardstock paper, and everybody got a copy of it as part of my packet. So they were able to look at it and go, "Oh, this person's thought it through. Oh, I don't know some of this music. Oh, this is good programming. Oh, all the things." And I don't know if that's what got me the job or if there just wasn't a lot of competition, but that's something I advise for people to do if they're thinking about it.
That's cool.
So then we both got the job, and then within 2 years we were married, and off we go. It's hard. I think a lot of people would like to have that situation. Their spouse is a teacher, and for us it's been fantastic. I'll just say, like, we don't really know any other way. It's been 16 years now that we've been doing it that way. And I know how she teaches. So then I can mold what I'm doing based on what the kids have learned. And she knows how I teach, so she can mold what she does based on what I'm doing.
That's
I think
cool.
it helps that we're both good teachers. How we keep a balance. I actually feel like because we can talk whenever we want, there's a lot of things we don't have to talk about. We've been doing it long enough together, but we'll purposely say, okay, we're not talking band here. We're not. At the same time, it's really nice for her to be able to vent to me about something, and she knows that I understand where she's coming from.
Uh-huh.
So for us, it's been really good. I think for some people that might be hard, but we definitely have a lot of other things that we do, so we try to take breaks when needed. And I know when she is not in a band mood, so I'm keeping all my band thoughts and things to myself. And then she knows when I'm not in the band mood, so she won't ask me about whatever issues. But we can basically do professional development when we take a walk around the neighborhood. You be
That's
like,
cool.
hey, this is terrible. Help me with this. So it works for us.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have that in my marriage. We don't have that because we have two totally different fields. But sometimes it's the same kind of problem. So my wife's a dental hygienist, and she hates it when she has to be gone and there's a sub seeing her patients,
Mm-hmm.
and she always says what they don't do as well. And the one difference I always push in there is that she doesn't have to prepare for a sub, so she doesn't have to like tell them, here's how you clean the teeth, make sure you do start on the left and go to the right, or what, I don't know what they do, but she doesn't have to write out instructions for her sub, which for me is the same. If I the 5% of the time when I can get a music sub, then I just say, here's what we're working on, and work on whatever you feel is best. I love being able to do that, but that is so rare.
Oh, a good music sub, man. If you get a good music sub, treat them well, pay them extra, bring them to dinner. Anything you can do, because it's amazing. I had Trey Blanco, who I mentioned earlier, was at Butler University now. When he was at USM, he would literally sub for me. He was a director of bands at the college in the local town, but when he wasn't teaching, if I had to be out sick with my young kids, he would come in and teach the band. And I'm like, I'm
Wow,
home with my kids throwing up, and literally they have the college band director doing the sub. I'm like,
that's cool.
and he didn't get paid for it. They just said it was okay, and he just came in and covered the rehearsals. I mean,
That's pretty
that was
cool.
pretty special. Anyways, all right. So we were talking about a jazz curriculum that you have that's about to be released called Jazz from the Start.
Yeah.
I'm super interested. Let's talk about it.
So I before I started teaching, I had a 10-year career in the Army band, and I started off just with a basic knowledge of jazz that I learned in high school. But I became a jazz expert and ended up playing lead tenor and having 4 or 5 solos every time we had a concert. And jazz has, from the time I was about 30 years old, jazz has been my forte. And unfortunately, it just never worked out that I really got to fully do that. The second school I was at was probably the one that came the closest, because I actually had a jazz band. But what would happen, this happened, I was there for 13 years, and I had to grow the jazz program 4 times, because for some reason someone had decided, if things aren't working right, we're going to go to a block schedule. And then after 3 years, oh, things aren't working right, we're going to go back to a non-block. And then we went back to a block, and then back to a non-block. And every time we did that, for some reason, the jazz program suffered the most, and it would take rebuilding it again. And just when I was like, okay, please don't change the schedule, we got it working, then they would change it again. The last school that I was at, it was a Title I school, and we just didn't have a chance for a jazz program. I tried to get something going after school a couple of times, and finally I said, you know what? Why am I fighting this? The kids should be able to enjoy jazz. And as you probably know, there's a lot more songs now where they have the parts written for the clarinets and flutes and baritones. And it makes it easier so you don't have to transpose anything. So we just started doing jazz as part of our concert band curriculum. I did it on Fridays, and I started them off with learning how to do the jazz phrasing, and we would do it on like 1-3-5. And do a call and response thing. And we got to where all the kids were improvising. They all did a solo. I required them to do one. And so I developed this 7-lesson program that takes kids from knowing nothing about jazz to being able to play in a jazz style and play and improvise solo. And that might not be a great solo yet, but some of the kids actually will surprise you and do really well with it. And so I call it jazz from day one because or jazz from the start, because that seems to have a better ring to it than jazz from the first 5 notes. But really, as soon as the kids know 5 notes, you can incorporate this curriculum. I'm about this close to having it done. The editing on the videos is the part that's taken the longest for me to do. But it'll be something that people can incorporate either once a week, like I did on Fridays. We would do the whole class period devoted to jazz. So each lesson is about a 30 to 40-minute lesson. And then after 7 weeks, you're kind of ready to go. Or they could incorporate it, 10 minutes at a time, a little bit. Each lesson could be broken up into 4 or 5 parts if they wanted to spread it out even further. But I'm very excited about it and very excited to get that out. Maybe by the time I air my side of the podcast with this, it might be ready. I'm not sure when you're going to air yours.
So where can they get where can they get the podcast? Where can they get the book?
So my website, it'll probably be on there, but it might be clunky to find. So jamesdevine.net, or they can send me an email, and we can get the show notes kind of going with this. The email is jamesthedivine, DIVINE, jamesthedivine@gmail.com. So it'll be either one of those 2 ways. I've got a list already of people who are interested in it, and I'm going to send them an email when that's finally available.
And if you would send me the info when it's available, and I'll put it out and mention it and spread the gospel as you wish.
Awesome.
And first of all, I think it's important that people know. I know my wife's in this category. I am not a jazz teacher. Like, I'm not a jazz player. I don't know how to do this. It is literally just like teaching band. It's just a different style, different articulation, different interpretation. But Tom Lizotte always told me it's just concert band with a rhythm section. So number one, if you're a young teacher, if you've never played in a jazz band, you can teach jazz.
I agree with that. But I think what this curriculum is going to cover is more like the improvisation part. It does have the simple jazz styles with playing the notes short and swing eighth notes, which is something that takes everybody a while to get the feel for that. But I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable with improvisation, and they shouldn't. It's just it's teaching the scales by kind of like the chord changes.
There's a couple things we've done on the podcast that come to mind too in this realm. So in addition to getting your text, for me, I had Dick Dunscombe on, who is, I believe he's the head of the jazz section of Midwest Clinic. It was episode number 76, and it was literally all about jazz articulation, jazz phrasing, and rhythm section. So some people can check that out too if they're looking for that information. And Terry White, I don't know if you know the name Terry White. He's a good friend of mine here in Maine, and he's a famous writer and so arranger, composer, both in concert band, but kind of a little bit more on the jazz side of things. He's got a ton of young band stuff as well as harder stuff. We just did a 6-part episode series. It was episodes number 109 to 114, we took 50 charts that were recommended that are grades 1 to grade 3. And we talked about each chart, how to teach each chart, and we showed the score and sound. So if anybody's watching on YouTube, they can literally see the video of the score as they listen to them as well to help with programming. Because I think programming the right charts is a huge deal when you're teaching a jazz band.
That's very cool. And I think I heard one of those 6 episodes. I have about 25 podcasts that I listen to. So
I know, right?
I don't listen to every single one of yours, Kyle, so don't be offended.
No. And people will say that. They'll say something like, oh, I haven't listened to that one. It's like, I don't care. It's not about that, but about having them available and just having stuff available.
Yeah, that's really cool to dig in deep like that. And were some of those ones that did have the concert band parts to it, like clarinet? And
Yep.
that's awesome.
Tons of them. I mean, clarinet's easy, right? Because clarinets can play the trumpet parts, but they do provide those a little bit. The biggest one is flute, French horn, treble clef euphonium, things like that. Here, can I give a pet peeve? I hate it when they write a tuba part for jazz band, but it's just the bass line.
Oh, I hate that.
I hate that. I mean, they're probably mean, right? But like, give me a trombone 4 part that's down an octave or something like that, or a bari sax part that's down an octave.
It's really hard for middle school, especially because they're the only one playing that then, and they're trying to play the bass part all by themselves. And that I just found that to be really hard. I think I have put a tuba player on the 3rd trombone or 4th trombone part before.
Yeah, it's also, people will say, well, switch them to trombone. Well, yes, I mean, sure, ideally that's the case, but that's not always what's going to happen. I have another pet peeve while we're on it. They write trumpet parts with good understanding of the range, like it doesn't go above 4th line D, right? But then you'll see these beginning, quote unquote, beginning jazz band charts where trombone 1 is up on high F. And it's like, my wife's like, can I get a chart where they don't go above B flat? Don't go above C, because it's how the voicings land out, right? They're like trumpet 1, trumpet 2, and then 3 might be doubled with bone. So it's like up higher. So those trombone parts need to come down. If you have a chart you want to do, trombone part is too high, just rewrite it or call someone who can rewrite it for you.
It may be something with the disconnect with how you're supposed to write versus those of us who are actually in the trenches with middle schoolers. And I'll tell you as a professional musician, when I was in the Army band, the hardest part was that second tenor. And it was because here's what I think happened. They write if you have a line of booba badooba badooba bop, and you got the melody and then you got the chords, and then the last note of the chord, they just like stick it into the second tenor part. And so it would make no sense. Everyone else is going booba dooba dooba, and the second tenor is going booba dooba dooba, all over the place. But it was very, very challenging, and it was actually easier to move to first tenor.
My mentor and high school band director's name is Craig Skeffington, and he's a writer too. One time we were on the podcast together, and he was talking about that specifically, about getting your music as a writer, getting it played live, so then you can get that feedback. And he mentioned exactly that. He's like, my second tenor parts were terrible, but it took me actually doing it live to realize that, to going back and facing it. So. Because a lot of times the bari part is going to have either the bass note or the doubled in the lead alto. So,
yeah. So going back to that middle school band without the jazz band, last year I actually took them to a jazz festival, and the first school I taught at, I had done the same thing because we didn't have room for a jazz band that time. I don't think I had worked with the improv that many years ago, but the interesting thing was the jazz people are way more open to outside the box thinking. So if you take I had a 30-piece concert band that I brought to a jazz festival, and besides oh no, where are we going to find all the chairs to put them? All the clinicians were like, this is so cool. You guys have clarinets up here and other things. The reverse side, I've gone to festivals where I've done an orchestra transcription for band. And I understand maybe if the clinician will one time mention it on the recording, hey, maybe you should like focus on band literature. But then when they harp on it like through the entire 3 minutes of the piece, now this is another reason why you shouldn't do the transcriptions. It's like, okay, leave us alone. Or if you have maybe it's got like an oboe solo, but you either don't have an oboe player
Yeah.
or oboe player can't play it. So you find someone who can play the solo. And not all clinicians are like that, but some are like, no, that was written for oboe. And okay, I don't have an oboe player.
Yeah. So it's like, do I not do the piece, or do
Yeah.
I put it in straight mute trumpet or alto sax or clarinet or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I wrote down this phrase, and we haven't talked about your philosophy of jazz improvisation, but one thing that I think is really important, in addition to programming standard tunes, like program real jazz literature, not just whatever other tune you want to do. But when you're doing improvisation, thinking about sound before sight, like as people learn how to read and speak, they listen for a few years before they really speak. So then, as a jazz musician, if you're improvising, if you're not listening to jazz and trying to copy somebody, then you're going to have a really hard time doing the vernacular. We talk about it as well when you're thinking about a language, like listening to that language as well as learning the dialect of that language
Yeah.
is so huge. And jazz is the same thing. You can tell when people just read it versus when they know it and they've heard it and it's part of their musical knowledge.
Yeah. And we talk about that in that Jazz from Day One um, program also. Because it takes years. I mean, yeah, there's 7 lessons in there, but you're not going to have a jazz band ready to go. And so even as part of that, what I started doing is playing jazz songs as the students were entering.
And that's great. That's a great way to get them to listen to something because they got 3 minutes, and while they put their clarinet together
Yeah.
or whatever it is, I think of it. I call it musical secondhand smoke. They're not smoking, but they're still getting it in their ear.
I'm going to have to steal that one. I like that one. Musical secondhand smoke.
I contributed something.
Thank you so much for doing this. This has been a pleasure to talk to you, and gives me another reason to go out to Maine.
Well, this has been really nice to connect.
Thanks so much, Kyle.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.